Out of all of the ways that we categorize human behavior, the division into introvert and extrovert is one of the most common, and perhaps one of the most misunderstood. For most of my life, I've heard these concepts oversimplified. The extrovert is the life of the party, and the introvert is the shy or socially awkward one who just needs to come out of their shell. But these simple descriptions miss the fundamental psychological truth that drives these personalities. These aren't just labels for how outgoing you are, they are distinctions rooted in how we draw our energy. Extroversion and introversion are not opposites. They are two sides of the same human experience. They are similar in that both types value connection, purpose, and engagement with the world. The difference lies in the direction of that energy. As defined by Carl Jung, the original architect of these concepts, the extrovert is energized by the external world of people and activity, while the introvert is energized by their internal world of thoughts and reflection. This episode is about stripping away the simplistic stereotypes. We'll dive into the psychology of both personality types, explore what unites them, and show how understanding their core differences can transform how you view yourself and everyone around you. So if you've ever felt misunderstood for needing a night in, or judged for never wanting to leave the dance floor, stick around. We're going to prove that whether you recharge in the spotlight or in quiet, we all have a vital role to play. I'm John Shaw, and you're listening to Your Mind on The Social Battery. And welcome back, everyone, to another week here on the Your Mind On podcast. I hope everyone has had a fantastic week and are settling into the holiday season. If this is your first time tuning into the podcast, I want to give you a big warm welcome. Typically at the start of the podcast, I offer up some housekeeping notes, but this week I don't really have any new notes to go through, so we're just going to dig right in. So, for the majority of my life, I have known and understood that I am an introvert, and like most introverts at a young age, I was frequently told to quit being shy, break out of my shell, and just go be social. And I did try. I'd go to birthday parties, play on sports teams, go to school dances, all in the effort to be more social, but I always felt a huge sense of relief when I was finally back home in my own personal space. As I got older, life became more social in many aspects, especially when I joined the military. It's difficult to be an introvert when the military is built to be a camaraderie. As time went on, even after leaving the military, I found myself feeling constantly burnt out. I was always tired and very irritable. This is often commonly referred to as an introvert hangover. And then a curious thing happened. A pandemic broke out and forced everyone to isolate themselves at home. I was able to keep working remotely, and for where I worked, this went on for a lot longer than it did for others. While the pandemic was extremely difficult for a lot of people since they suddenly didn't have the daily human interaction that they're used to, for me and countless other introverts, we thrived. I found that I was constantly happier. I had more energy. And even bigger, my productivity at work was vastly improved. However, for people that lean more to the extrovert side of things, the COVID lockdown was a real struggle. Earlier this year, we were finally instructed to return to working in the office 5 days per week. And since then, I've found that I'm always tired, irritable, and struggling to get the motivation to do anything outside of work. It takes a lot of effort for me to do anything outside of the house when I'm not working. However, in conversations with coworkers that are extroverted, they are all greatly relieved to be back working in the office. To them, life has returned to normal. And it's created a sense of conflict that I was hoping wouldn't exist, but I'm not surprised. It's difficult for extroverts to understand introverts, just as it is for introverts to understand extroverts. And that is the exact reason why I felt this episode was so incredibly important. It is critical for us to understand each other. Understanding these differences will help in our relationships with our partners, spouses, coworkers, children, and virtually everyone else we interact with in our lives. So let's start by taking a look at the history and where the terms and concepts of introvert and extrovert come from. The concept of introvert and extrovert was first proposed by Carl Jung as contrasting personality types or attitudes as a part of his 3 pairs of opposing types. He claimed that these types are present in all individuals, but that one is more dominant than the others, and that this structure means that personality is organized along 3 dimensions. Extroversion, introversion, or attitude types, is the first of the 3 and describes how consciousness is directed, either by objective motives or subjective motives. Sensing and intuition, or irrational/perceiving functions, is the next pair. Sensation is the function that transmits physiological stimuli to conscious perception, while intuition is the function that transmits invisible mental associations. Third is thinking, feeling, or rational judging functions. Thinking is the function that uses concepts to connect information according to logical laws, while feeling is the function that accepts or rejects a concept according to its subjective value. Catherine Cook Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers added one more pairing to this later on, which is judging, perceiving, or preference. Now, if this system of 4 categories of 2 types each sounds somewhat familiar, you may be thinking of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI. Jung's proposal was the basis for the MBTI. Jung's work was later enhanced by Hans Eysenck, who studied the biological basis for personality. Eysenck proposed that introverts and extroverts are driven by the need to regulate cortical arousal levels. I won't describe too much about Eysenck's work here because that's going to be really covered a bit later on in the show. So for now, let's look at introverts and extroverts in terms of characteristics. Extroverts are designed by their reliance on external energy, specifically gaining energy from being around other people and through social interaction. Basically, extroverts feel energized when around other people and are refreshed when spending time around other people. This means that an extrovert feels happiest when in a social setting, interacting with friends, coworkers, family. Extroverts tend to use an external processing style, which means that they form and process their thoughts as they speak, often referred to as thinking out loud. This means that an introvert will tend to speak their thoughts in a lively flow of ideas and often say things before even really thinking about them. They often feel that they need to speak their thoughts out loud as a way of expressing themselves fully. This allows people to respond to their thoughts on the spot and encourage lively conversations and brainstorming. Extroverts tend to have wide social circles and often love being the center of attention. Another major defining characteristic of an extrovert is what happens when they spend time alone for long periods of time. When this happens, they usually feel understimulated and bored, and that's why the COVID lockdown was so difficult for them. Introverts are essentially the opposite. Introverts rely on internal energy and thrive when they are in a quiet place where they can contemplate situations in an inward fashion. You'll likely find an introvert in solitude or in low stimulus places. Basically, where an extrovert might choose to spend an evening out at a bar or a club, especially after a long day at work, an introvert will likely choose to stay home or go somewhere like a coffee shop where the music's going to be a little quieter and people just generally are not as loud. Where extroverts prefer to talk through situations and process as they speak and receive input from others, an introvert will choose to sit somewhere quiet and process things, or choose to write as a way of processing. Introverts usually have smaller social circles. An introvert chooses to cultivate friendships and relationships that offer deep connections, and then only have a few close friends rather than a broad social circle. Spending time in large groups or major social settings is extremely difficult for an introvert. That doesn't mean that they don't enjoy going out from time to time, but they will likely need more time at home to recover afterward. Because of these characteristics, the introvert is most often seen as shy and reserved. And as a point of clarification, being introverted does not automatically make someone shy. Shyness is actually a fear of social judgment, where introversion is a preference for low stimulation. An introvert might not be shy at all, and you can in fact find an extrovert that is shy. Now, technically, there is a third category here, which is called ambiverts. Ambiverts show characteristics of both introvert and extrovert. They enjoy alone time and social settings equally, in equal doses. Ambiverts tend to be highly adaptive, changing their behavior based on the situation. So what makes someone an introvert or an extrovert? Is it simply a matter of upbringing and social experience? Well, the short answer is no. There are several factors that contribute to someone being an introvert or an extrovert. There are two main neurotransmitters involved in determining this. The first is dopamine, which is the reward or external motivation neurotransmitter. Extroverts have a nervous system that is highly responsive to external stimulation and rewards, which is largely attributed to the activity of their dopamine system. In extroverts, the dopamine reward network is more active than it is in introverts, which means that extroverts are more prone to seek out and being energized by external stimuli. For introverts, the dopamine is less active, so external stimuli and dopamine can overstimulate them, which can cause a feeling of their energy being drained. It's important to note that both extroverts and introverts have the same amount of dopamine available in their brains. It's just how their brains respond to the dopamine. When extroverts anticipate external rewards like social acceptance or professional success, they experience a rush of good feelings and become more energized. Meanwhile, when introverts anticipate the same external rewards, they will often feel overwhelmed. This is linked to higher levels of cortical arousal in introverts. Cortical arousal is the brain's overall state of alertness and responsiveness. This state of cortical arousal is what causes feelings of being overstimulated. In contrast, introverts tend to have a preference for the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Essentially, this neurotransmitter is linked to pleasure when they turn inward to think deeply, reflect, and focus intensely on just one thing. Acetylcholine is linked to the parasympathetic side of the nervous system, which is sometimes referred to as the throttle down side. Introverts prefer this feeling of slowing down, quieting things down, as opposed to extroverts that tend to favor the more full throttle, sympathetic side of the nervous system. Another key physiological aspect of introvert and extrovert is the blood flow in the brain. In extroverts, there's a higher rate of blood flow to the areas of the brain that are responsible for sensory perception and emotions. In contrast, for introverts, the blood flow is higher to the frontal lobes, which involve memory, problem solving, and planning. So now that we've gotten through the science part, let's take a look at some normal interactions and how they differ between introvert and extrovert. The first one that really comes to mind is in business. This is something that has always been a problem, and I do think it's slowly improving, but there's still a long ways to go. When we imagine someone that is successful in business, we tend to think of a stereotype. Someone that's good with words, very social, very persuasive, extremely outgoing. We sometimes refer to them as type A personalities. And at work, these are generally the people that are going to move up quickly with promotions. They're seen as the right fit for a promotion because of their outgoing nature. These, of course, are the extroverts. However, extroverts can also be seen as somewhat aloof because of their constant need to talk to people. Meanwhile, the introverts are traditionally thought of as the quiet, shy people that just aren't going to move up in the company. They're thought of as not having very good people skills or being too reserved to really help the business by receiving a promotion. As an introvert, I experienced something very much like this. When I arrived at my first duty station in the military, my supervisor noted that while everyone else was gathering in a group, goofing off and being loud, I was usually off to the side, quiet and watching. He obviously didn't understand the concepts of introvert and extrovert except for the traditional way of thinking about them. He later told me that because of my silence and being reserved, he assumed that I was, in his words, slow mentally. Because of this, he couldn't wait to move me out of his team and into a less significant role in his eyes. When the opportunity came, he assigned me the duty of being the operations major's driver. Normally in the military, this is a pretty mundane job. You sit in an office doing little menial tasks that no one else wants to do, and you drive the major from point A to point B and wait for him to give you another task. However, when I got to the operations office, I spent time observing how everyone interacted, the tasks everyone was working on, and ways that things could be improved. As soon as I had this all down in my mind, I started making suggestions. Occasionally, I would take initiative and make the changes that I felt would improve how the operations office functioned. It didn't take long before the major pulled me aside one day and told me that he would no longer be requesting that I drive him anywhere. As you can imagine, I was a little bit panicked, thinking I'd done something wrong. But instead, he said that I was too valuable of a member of the operations team to waste my time driving him around. Before long, despite being a very low rank, I was coordinating a lot of operations, helping with event planning, and making suggestions for changes to internal policies. I have always been eternally grateful to Major O'Neill for recognizing that my silence wasn't being slow or antisocial, but that I was observing, processing, and planning. That put me on a much better track within the military, and even my old supervisor that had sent me away to this detail commented that it was a brilliant decision for me to be there. And yes, he did apologize for misunderstanding my true nature. So, if you're a supervisor or a business owner or a manager, pay attention to your employees. The extrovert is a vital part of your team. They're the ones that are going to pull everyone together socially. They'll encourage collaboration, brainstorming, and help strategize a plan forward. But the introvert is also an extremely vital part of your team. They're the ones sitting in the back and just observing everything. They're the one that will notice who on your team is underperforming or maybe has ulterior motives. They're the ones that will notice the finer details in a plan or process and be able to improve upon it. Both introverts and extroverts are essential for a team to properly succeed, and both are equally deserving of moving up within the company when the time comes. You just have to decide, do you want the person of action or do you want the planner? Of course, the workplace isn't the only place you will encounter introverts and extroverts. Our personal relationships include both as well, and it's important that you understand how each functions. In romantic relationships and marriage, for example, this can be a very critical thing to understand. It does happen far more often than not that one person in the relationship will be an extrovert while the other will be an introvert. And this can cause a lot of chaos in a relationship if you don't take the time to recognize it. As we've covered at length, an introvert is an extremely social person. They need this social aspect of their lives to function properly. But an introvert is sort of the opposite. They need solitude and quiet regularly to function. So what happens when an introvert and an extrovert are in a relationship together? Well, the key is to find balance. The extrovert needs to understand that the introvert cannot constantly be going out on the town, socializing with large groups, and constantly being on the go. Otherwise, the introvert will completely break down. But the introvert also needs to have some mindfulness on this. They need to understand that the person that they're with needs social interaction beyond just their relationship. They need time outside the house to cut loose and enjoy being social. They need dinner parties with groups of friends, game nights, going dancing, and all of the social things. So because of this, it's so important for the two to find a balance in order for the relationship to survive. Overloading on time with friends or time at home in the quiet will be terrible for one person or the other. It's important to have this conversation with each other and formulate a plan and an understanding. There are times of year when this can be harder than at other times. I know for me, for example, this time of year, the holiday season, can be extremely taxing on me. There is already a lot of stress with the holidays, as we talked about in our holiday stress episode, but then you add in the social interaction, and I have a tendency to get worn down really quickly. For me personally, the ideal holiday season would be spending time at home with just the few people I'm closest with, maybe next to a nice fire, sipping a nice warm drink. However, I also have to be aware that my wife is more social than I am and more of an extrovert. So holiday parties, greeting friends, visiting family, these are things that she needs. So we do have to have a balance. We need to spend time doing both things. At times, it will be exhausting for each of us, but the reward is seeing the other person happy and comfortable and getting their needs met. So maybe on a Friday or a Saturday, we can go do something social, go out dancing, or go to a dinner party with friends. And then Sunday, we have a quiet day at home to relax. Or in the worst case, we can do things separately to make sure that our individual needs are met. It doesn't mean that we don't love each other or want to be with each other, but it's simply about making sure we're both meeting the needs that we have. So, as you go forward into the holidays and into the new year, make a conscious effort to understand the people around you better. Understand that the one friend that rarely goes out with the group is likely an introvert and just needs that time alone. And it's not that they don't want to spend time with you. Understand that the one friend that seems to constantly want to go out to parties and social events isn't ignoring your need for solitude, but that they're just trying to fulfill their own need. Taking the time to consciously note who around you is an introvert and who is an extrovert, and making a note of what they need is going to just greatly improve your relationships. And with that, we're going to wrap up for the week a little bit earlier than usual. I hope you've enjoyed learning some things from this episode. This one, as an introvert, has been really important for me, and I hope it has been for you as well. Don't forget that the podcast is on Instagram now. The link is in the show notes. And if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to email the show at hello@yourmindonpodcast.com. I always value feedback, both positive and negative. I want this show to be something that people both enjoy and learn from, and your comments are just going to help me really reach that. And don't forget to rate the show. As I've said many times before, ratings will help the show grow, and it's going to give me the opportunity to expand and grow the show in so many ways. Next week, we're going to do something a little different, but I think it's a bit necessary. Next week's episode is going to be a gateway of sorts that's going to unlock the door to many future episodes that I just can't in good conscience do without first talking about next week's topic. So next week, we're going to take an in-depth look at forensic psychology. As a society, when we think of forensic psychology, we almost always automatically think of the behavioral analysis unit of the FBI, thanks to television shows like Criminal Minds. But how accurate is this kind of psychological profiling? A lot of psychology students have aspirations of going into this field, but is it exactly as Hollywood makes it out to be? Besides profiling kidnappers and serial killers, are there other aspects or jobs within the field of forensic psychology? And how is this a key to future episodes? Well, I'll answer that last question right now. I feel like I need to give a good in-depth view of forensic psychology before I can really dive into some of the interesting content that's out there, and that is psychological descriptions of some of the most well-known and notorious criminals and serial killers out there. To be clear, this is not a true crime podcast. I'm not going to be focusing on the crimes that were committed or going into any detail about the crimes, the crime scenes, the evidence, but rather on the psychological makeup and traumas that may have contributed to creating some of the most truly evil people we have ever seen. Once again, thank you for listening today. I'm John Shaw, and remember, understanding your mind is the first step to changing your life. Until next time, be kind to yourself.